really, I've shown it to a bunch of musicians, but I was trying to play it with like my friend who's a drummer, and he was like, "You're not following like a proper rhythm," and I was like, "Well, that's the point. So like, you figure out a drum beat that goes well with my part, you know?"
That's yeah, I'm dying. That's so funny. But you know, that's a great response on your part. Yeah. Oh man. Maybe something like that I don't know, I subscribe to, maybe it's useful. I'm glad that what I'm saying can be useful because I'm trying to like not just like pontificate or anything, but something that's really useful that I think about all the time is like a defining feature of my musical practice, creative practice, that I think throws a lot of people for a loop who are like trained musicians, that doesn't seem to throw people for a loop who are not trained musicians, is that I'm very sort of like this might sound like it's in conflict with some of the things that I was saying earlier, but sort of like concept before technique. And so by concept I just mean like not as in like concept album necessarily or anything like that, but as in like there's a reason that the music exists. And it could be, in the case of a song, like a narrative reason, or if it's something experimental, it could be like some other thing. But it's like, I guess the music is supposed to be an experience. And if the music succeeds at being the experience that I'm trying to create, then then it's a successful piece of music. But like everything else, whether like being right or being wrong according to the rules of music theory, which describe things that have already been written, that's completely secondary to getting to like cultivating the experience that I'm trying to create, in my case, like through sound, you know? And so really it's like, also there were so many things that were new that people didn't like, that more conservative minded people, or at least more conservatively musically minded people didn't really get in their time. And so it's kind of funny is that often when somebody's doing something like that, it's because they're trying to get to this feeling, and there are people who are like, that's wrong or whatever. And then later people give it a new name. So after the fact, they're like, oh, it's that, and then as soon as it has a name, it's legitimized. But I think it's totally fine as artists, like artistically minded people, to be out here in the unknown, trying things and not necessarily having names for them yet. And I think that if you can, well, for one thing, just I try not to work with people who are energetically going to be like that. And I guess in my case, I can back it up with music theory, language, or whatever if I want to. But so I guess step one is cultivating community that's going to be that's going to be down to meet you where you're at. Basically, working with people that you want to work with who are going to support your aesthetic, believing in your aesthetic. And I think there's something to be said for protecting your aesthetic by not sharing it with people in a public way until you're feeling very confident in it. Like, especially if it's like a fragile thing. And there are types of music for me that I need to protect by not sharing it with people necessarily, unless it's the right people. And then there are other things where I'm like, screw it, I'm going to take a risk, you know? But yeah, I think that cultivating, okay, I want to be more, okay, I'm just thinking about how to communicate about this because we're talking about such a funny, it's so hard to put words to this. It's different than playing scales on a single string, you know? When you're making a decision, especially a decision that breaks some like rule, then you can make it sort of for yourself, and like you can make this sort of piece of music for yourself. You can release it and you can share the sound with yourself. I think something that could be a useful communication strategy with people who are going to be open-minded to it is that you can use language in some way to give your collaborators a doorway in, you know? And so if people are just not the right fit for you and they're just not going to be open to this, then they're just like the wrong drummer or something. But maybe, I don't know, like how would you describe this rhythmic feeling to me that you were going for? And like I'm failing at language so much right now because I'm trying to talk about something that I haven't tried to talk about before. But what if you tried to fail at language by describing this rhythmic feeling that you're going for, you know? Also, I think you're muted right now.
I'm just thinking.
Okay, okay. Thanks for being
Um,
so
Thanks for being so
open
open
too.
too.
yeah, No problem. Maybe I'm looking a little like nervous, but I'm this is totally cool. Yeah, I mean that's another thing. After he made that comment, I was like, "Oh, well, I want to know what's going on then. Like, what do you mean like the verse or the chord or this B part is not falling on the right beat?" And I'm like, "What is the right beat?" Because back then also I didn't know much about that stuff. And that like that's why I really appreciate folk music because it doesn't really follow these rules, and oftentimes like each recording can be unique, like each live performance of the song can be slightly different from another because it's really just the musician like expressing themselves through their instrument. So they might miss a beat, they might go into the verse or the chorus earlier than usual, or repeat a part a bunch of times. Um, and that's essentially like my songwriting, or for this song, that was my songwriting process. And I liked the result, so I didn't mess with it or try to box it in. But to describe like the rhythm of it, um, I really like this. I've realized that I really value in music like the tension and release, which this is something that's talked about a lot and is kind of cliche, I guess. But when I'm when I when I'm enjoying a song or analyzing a song or thinking about like writing a song, I'm like tension and release, like, and that's kind of what happened in this piece. Is like it starts off. It is. Would you say it's kind of like a call and response vibe?
I'm not sure if I've necessarily gotten call and response from what I was just hearing, but we could maybe we can pick this up in another call and kind of dig into why you might be thinking about
I
call and
Call and
response stuff.
response stuff.
But I
But
do
I do
actually, I
actually,
have
I
one
have one
other
other
thought.
thought.
Also, I'm sorry, like if you turn off your live performance audio, then we'll get rid of the echo. I don't know if you're hearing the echo. Yeah. Um, yeah, I have one other question for you, or maybe a statement that leads to a question, which is that one of the things that I hear in a lot of folk music's plural, because there are all these different types of folk musics. I think, and the thing that you're describing is a looser, especially in what the types of folk musics that I think you're describing, which are a little bit more like outsider-ish. They're a little bit more like untrained. I think there's a looser relationship to concepts like grid. Um, yeah. Yeah, like, does that resonate with you? How do you feel about this idea of having a looser or rougher relationship to like the idea of grid?
Yeah, I mean that makes sense to me, and it's funny because I recently learned about the grid because I took a class on J Dilla, so I learned about like the sample grid and seeing rhythm through like the grid, and what Dilla how Dilla like deviated a little from the grid and made it like really confusing. Like a lot of musicians were really confused, and now, like you were saying before, like at first musicians were like, "Oh, this is wrong. This makes no sense." Or he's just like a sloppy drummer beat maker, and actually he created a new I mean, according to my professor, he created a new form of rhythm, um or rhythmic grid. And then a bunch of jazz musicians like started practicing it with their instruments, and they were like blown away by like what they could make with it. So yeah, I'm really interested in this concept of like the grid, like sticking to it, deviating from it, like what that means. Um, you know, Whereas back when I wrote that song, I was very like, I didn't want to learn music theory. I was like, I want to do like what the people who inspired me did, which is they didn't learn anything. They just figured it out, you know, and then they came out with this in astonishing music. Whereas now I'm like, actually, I want to know everything about it. And that'll like help me. It's not, I don't think it'll stunt my creativity at this point.
Totally. Yeah, it's amazing how or it's really it's funny how that changes. I've had conversations with other people who have had similar feelings. Wow, I've got a few like I can stay for a few more minutes because there's some really good stuff that's happening. I'd love to pick this up sometime soon and you're in the thing, so we can do, like there are other days of the week and stuff. I just want to say a little bit more relative to the idea of grid. So like, yeah, like with like drum machines and beat making, and like it's amazing that Dilla came up right next to outsider folk music. Like this is so the dream of like what I want create interesting music conversations to be like, which is so cool. But yeah, so like with drum machines, with Ableton, the grid's like very literal, and it's like you press the button and it goes here and here. But also, a lot of Western classical music's totally on a grid as well. Like, I mean, if we're the staff is a weird grid, but it still is a point where you enter points, the rhythms go in a specific place, they're counted, you know. And then there's like, there are tempo modulations. Like the tempo might change, so the grid might change, the time signature might change, the length of a beat might change. If the tempo changes, there are times where the beat will speed up. Like there's like an accelerando or like a retardando where like the beat slows down. So the grid does kind of do this a little bit. Like it can be kind of goopy and you can like pull it around in different directions, but there's still a sense of grid. And wow, a lot of sirens tonight. This is what I get for living right on the street. Yeah, and I think what's interesting about to like just contrast what you're doing versus very like classically minded approach to having like a flexible goopy relationship to grid is that in those cases everybody's like there's a lot of language around how it all works, and there's a sort of like agreed upon set of ideas about how it's supposed to feel, not just like rhythmically but like existentially, like the feeling you're supposed to have when you hear an orchestra speeding up or slowing down. It's like it's a pretty boxed in feeling zone. Whereas what you're doing, maybe it's like we could say like rubato, where you're playing around with time, like it's kind of swooshing and speeding up and slowing down, but the emotional result is very different. And I think that's where people like Dilla and like outsider folk music people come up, where they're expressing a different relationship to grid, kind of in pursuit of a different feeling. Um, I'd love to talk about this for a long time because this is like totally like a passion thing for me. But I think that might be a stopping point. I guess if maybe just one last thing is like if you have any reactions, responses, thoughts to any of this, I'd love to just get some kind of closing thoughts from you, like, well, this is like fresh in your mind.
Like, like on the grid or,
Or like we're just what's happening in your brain right now.
um, endorphins. I don't know.
Cool.
We're,
Okay.
this is great. I'm very pleased.